The 1960s gave us a decade of music that still sounds alive today. These weren't just popular bands. They were the ones who changed what music could be and what it could mean. Here are the 10 best bands of the 1960s everyone should know. Number 10. Creedence Clearwater Revival. If you grew up anywhere near a radio in the late 1960s, you know what Creedence Clearwater Revival sounded like, even if you couldn't always put the name to the music right away. Formed in El Cerrito, California, in 1959 under the name The Blue Velvets, before becoming Creedence in 1967, the band was built around 4 members: John Fogerty on lead vocals and guitar, his brother Tom Fogerty on rhythm guitar, Stu Cook on bass, and Doug Clifford on drums. What made Creedence so distinctive was how completely out of step they were with everything happening around them. In the age of sprawling psychedelic albums and San Francisco flower power excess, Creedence played lean, driving, swamp-soaked rock and roll that sounded like it had grown out of the Louisiana bayou rather than a California suburb. John Fogerty wrote the songs, sang them with a voice full of grit, and kept the band tight and purposeful in a way that very few bands of the era managed. Between 1968 and 1970, Creedence put out 5 studio albums and 14 consecutive top 10 singles, a pace of output that stands almost alone in rock history. Songs like Proud Mary, Bad Moon Rising, Green River, and Fortunate Son became the kind of tracks that belonged to everyone, not just record buyers. They played Woodstock in 1969, performing a 2-hour set at 3 in the morning that reportedly shook the crowd back to life. Their music carried a deep feeling for working-class America, the people driving trucks, working night shifts, shipping out to Vietnam. And that connection made it last. When Creedence broke apart in 1972 after internal tensions became too much to manage, the body of work they left behind in those few short years was extraordinary. Rolling on a river. Number 9. The Kinks. The Kinks came out of Muswell Hill in North London in 1963, put together by brothers Ray and Dave Davies, along with bassist Peter Quaife and drummer Mick Avery. Ray Davies wrote the songs, and from the very beginning, what he wrote sounded different from everyone else. The band's 1964 single, You Really Got Me, reached number 1 in the UK and cracked the American top 10. A distorted, hammering guitar riff built on raw power that would later be cited as one of the blueprints for hard rock and heavy metal. But the Kinks were never just one kind of band. As the 1960s wore on, Ray Davies turned into one of the sharpest and most idiosyncratic songwriters in British music. He wrote about English village life, the dying music hall tradition, class anxiety, and the quiet sadness of ordinary people, in a way that nobody else in rock was touching. Albums like Something Else by the Kinks in 1967, and The Kinks or the Village Green Preservation Society in 1968 were deeply specific, deeply English, and deeply personal, and they found an audience that stayed loyal for decades. The Kinks were banned from touring the United States from 1965 to 1969 by the American Federation of Musicians following incidents during their first U.S. tour, which cut them off from the world's biggest music market at exactly the moment they might have broken through commercially. That ban kept them from achieving the kind of fame their songwriting deserved, and it changed the entire trajectory of the band's career. While the Beatles and the Stones were filling arenas from coast to coast, the Kinks were working the British and European circuit, sharpening their craft and deepening their sound in relative commercial isolation. When the ban was eventually lifted, the musical landscape had already shifted around them, but their influence never dimmed. Virtually every British guitar band that followed, from The Jam to The Pretenders to Blur, owed something to what the Davies brothers built in a North London rehearsal room in the early 1960s. Ray Davies was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Kinks in 1990. Number 8. The Byrds.
To everything turn.
The Byrds were formed in Los Angeles in 1964, with a lineup that included Roger McGuinn, Gene Clark, David Crosby, Chris Hillman, and Michael Clark. They were signed to Columbia Records and released their debut single, a cover of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man, in April 1965. It went to #1 on both sides of the Atlantic and introduced something genuinely new. Folk music played through electric guitars with 12-string Rickenbacker shimmer and close harmony, singing that sounded like the Beatles, and Dylan had somehow been poured into the same recording session. Folk rock was essentially the Byrds' invention, or at least the first fully realized version of it, and they didn't stop there. By 1966, they had released 8 Miles High, one of the first psychedelic rock songs, which drew as much from jazz legend John Coltrane as it did from the British invasion. Radio stations banned it on the mistaken assumption the lyrics were about drugs, which only deepened its mystique. Roger McGuinn's 12-string Rickenbacker guitar playing on that track and throughout the band's early albums created a sound so specific and so distinctive that it became its own genre marker, instantly recognizable, impossible to fake. In 1968, they helped launch country rock with Sweetheart of the Rodeo, an album now considered one of the most influential records in the entire genre, recorded with a young Graham Parsons on board. That record pointed the way toward the Eagles, Emmylou Harris, and an entire strand of American music that would define the following decade. The Byrds cycled through lineups with great frequency, and their commercial momentum never fully held together. But in a handful of years, they helped invent at least 3 distinct genres: folk rock, psychedelic rock, and country rock. Almost every American rock and country band that came after them was building on something the Byrds had already put in the ground. Number 7. Cream. Cream formed in London in the summer of 1966, and from the very beginning, they were something unusual, a supergroup made up of 3 musicians who were already considered among the best in Britain. Guitarist Eric Clapton had come through the Yardbirds and John Mayall's Blues Breakers. Drummer Ginger Baker was a jazz-trained powerhouse who had played with the Graham Bond Organization. Bassist and vocalist Jack Bruce had also come through the Graham Bond Organization and brought a classical music training and a voice that could cut through anything. Together, they made a sound that nobody quite had a name for yet: heavy, blues-rooted, technically explosive, and loud, in a way that hadn't been normalized in popular music. They played extended improvisations in concert that could run 20 minutes or more, turning the rock gig into something closer to a jazz performance. Their 1966 debut Fresh Cream established them immediately. Their 1967 album Disraeli Gears produced Sunshine of Your Love and Strange Brew, tracks that became staples. Wheels of Fire in 1968 was the first platinum-selling double album in history. They lasted only about 2.5 years before Baker and Bruce's relentless personal animosity made continuing impossible. And the band dissolved in late 1968 with a farewell concert at the Royal Albert Hall in London in November of that year. But in that brief period, Cream essentially mapped out the territory that hard rock and heavy metal would occupy for the next decade. Clapton's guitar playing during those years, the tone he drew out of a Les Paul through a Marshall stack, the phrasing that came from years of studying the Chicago blues masters, is still studied by musicians around the world. The blueprint of 3 virtuoso players building something larger than the sum of their parts defined what a rock power trio could be. And every power trio that came after, from ZZ Top to Rush to the White Stripes, built on the foundation Cream laid. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. Number 6. The Doors. The Doors came together in Los Angeles in 1965 after Jim Morrison, a film student at UCLA, connected with keyboardist Ray Manzarek on the beach in Venice. They added guitarist Robbie Krieger and drummer John Densmore, And Morrison suggested the name from the title of Aldous Huxley's 1954 book The Doors of Perception, which itself drew its title from a line in William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. One detail that set them apart from almost every other rock band of the era: they had no bass player. Manzarek played bass lines on a keyboard with his left hand, while his right hand carried the melodic parts, giving the band a hollow, organ-heavy sound that was unlike anything else on the radio. Their self-titled debut album in January 1967 included Light My Fire, which ran over 7 minutes in its album version, and became one of the defining singles of the decade when edited down for radio play. Morrison was an extraordinary and deeply difficult figure, a genuine poet who could hold a stadium audience absolutely still, and also a self-destructive personality who tested every limit he could find. Their music ranged from blues-inflected rock to theatrical, almost operatic pieces built around Morrison's imagery and Krieger's fluid guitar. The Doors were the first American band to have 8 consecutive RIAA-certified gold albums. Morrison died in Paris in July 1971, aged 27, and the band attempted to continue without him before dissolving in 1973. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. The music they made in those 6 years still carries an atmosphere you can't find quite anywhere else. Number 5. Sly and the Family Stone. Most of the bands on this list were built around one sound or one idea. Sly and the Family Stone were built around an argument. The argument that race, gender, and genre were walls that had no reason to exist. Formed in San Francisco in 1966 by Sylvester Stewart, known as Sly Stone, the band was the first major American rock group to have a racially integrated, mixed-gender lineup performing together on stage as full members. Sly's brother Freddie Stone and sister Rose Stone were in the band. Cynthia Robinson played trumpet. Larry Graham was on bass. They came from gospel, soul, R&B, and rock, and they played all of it at the same time. Their 1968 single, Dance to the Music, was their commercial breakthrough, reaching the top 10 on both the pop and R&B charts. But the record that defined them was Stand, released in May 1969. It was a joyful, politically charged, musically restless album that sounded like nothing before it. Funk rhythms, psychedelic textures, gospel energy, and lyrics that asked for unity without being naive about how far away it was. Everyday People, the lead single, reached number 1 and introduced the phrase, different strokes for different folks, to the American vocabulary. Their performance at Woodstock in August 1969 is still talked about as one of the best sets of the entire festival. They took the stage at 3:30 in the morning and had 400,000 people on their feet. The influence they set in motion from that moment runs through nearly every strand of subsequent popular music. Funk, hip-hop, soul, disco, and modern R&B all carry something of what Sly Stone built in those years. Miles Davis cited them directly as an influence on Bitches Brew. George Clinton built Parliament Funkadelic on their blueprint. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. Number 4. Love. If you have never heard of Love, that is the most important sentence in this entire video. They were formed in Los Angeles in 1965 by Arthur Lee, a songwriter from Memphis who had grown up in LA and absorbed everything the city had to offer: R&B, folk, rock, flamenco, jazz, and classical music. Lee assembled a racially integrated band in a city and an era where that was genuinely unusual, and they became the house band at the Whiskey A Go-Go on Sunset Strip, at a time when that room was the center of the California rock universe. They were so dominant in Los Angeles in 1966 that The Doors, whom Lee had played a direct role in getting signed to Elektra Records, could not get a booking there, because Love already had the residency. Their first two albums, Love in 1966 and Da Capo in 1966, showed a band moving fast and in multiple directions at once. The third album, Forever Changes, released in November 1967, was something else entirely. It was recorded in the middle of band tensions and personal chaos, mostly in 64 hours of studio time, with session musicians filling in when the band members couldn't get it together. What came out was a suite of songs built from acoustic guitars, strings, brass, and Arthur Lee's voice, dark, paranoid, and beautiful in equal measure, full of imagery about collapse and beauty existing side by side. Jim Morrison listed Love as one of his favorite bands. Robert Plant has cited Forever Changes as one of his favorite albums. Rolling Stone placed it among the greatest albums ever made, and it was added to the Library of Congress National Recording Registry in 2011. Forever Changes barely charted when it came out. It reached number 154 in the United States. The band broke apart shortly after. Lee spent much of the following decades in and out of trouble with the law and his own health. He died in 2006. The band never had another moment like that album, but that album was enough. Number 3. The Who. The Who formed in London in 1964, with a lineup that would stay remarkably stable for over a decade. Singer Roger Daltrey, guitarist Pete Townshend, bassist John Entwistle, and drummer Keith Moon. Their early singles, I Can't Explain, in 1965, Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere, and My Generation, established them as one of the most aggressive and exciting bands in Britain. They were known early on for deliberately destroying their instruments at the end of concerts, a theatrical gesture that became part of their identity before it became an expensive habit. Pete Townshend was the central creative force, a songwriter of genuine depth and ambition, who pushed the band toward increasingly complex work. In 1969, they released Tommy, a double album conceived as a rock opera, a continuous narrative work structured around a single story told through music. It was the first sustained attempt at that form in rock, and it worked. Tommy reached number 2 on the UK charts and number 4 in the US, and it established a template for concept albums that artists would work from for the next decade. Keith Moon was by any measure one of the most remarkable drummers who ever played rock music, physically explosive, melodically inventive, and utterly impossible to ignore. He played the kit like he was fighting it, filling spaces that other drummers would have left empty, and he did it with a kind of manic precision that somehow never fell apart. John Entwistle's bass playing, often buried under Moon's drumming and Townshend's guitar, was technically sophisticated in ways that most listeners took years to fully register. He was one of the most underrated musicians in rock. Together, they made a sound that was enormous in the room, and their live performances in the late 1960s were by all accounts genuinely overwhelming experiences. Their 1969 appearance at the Isle of Wight Festival drew a crowd estimated at 150,000 people. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1990. Number 2. The Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones came together in London in 1962, initially forming around Mick Jagger, Brian Jones, and Keith Richards, who had reconnected on a train platform after discovering they shared a taste for American rhythm and blues. Bill Wyman joined on bass in December 1962, and Charlie Watts settled in as drummer in January 1963. They were managed by Andrew Loog Oldham from 1963, who encouraged a rougher, more dangerous image as a deliberate contrast to the cleaner presentation of the Beatles. Their relationship with American blues was not incidental. It was the foundation of everything. Songs by Muddy Waters, Robert Johnson, Chuck Berry, and Bo Diddley ran through their early recordings. And the recordings they made of their own material in the first years had that same blues feeling at the core. The Jagger-Richards songwriting partnership, which Oldham pushed them to develop, produced a string of singles through the mid-1960s that were impossible to ignore. The Last Time, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, in 1965, Paint It, Black, Jumpin' Jack Flash, Sympathy for the Devil. By 1968's Beggar's Banquet, they had stripped back the psychedelic experiments of the previous year and returned to a roots-oriented sound that felt leaner and more dangerous than anything they'd made before. The Stones toured relentlessly across the decade, building a live reputation that would eventually outlast those of almost every contemporary. Brian Jones, whose vision had originally founded the band, slid through much of the decade into drug dependency and increasing isolation before being asked to leave in June 1969. He drowned in his swimming pool less than a month later, aged 27. Mick Taylor joined as his replacement, and the band continued its run. What the Stones achieved across the 1960s was a body of music that managed to be simultaneously rooted in tradition and completely current, as raw as the blues records they loved, and as sharp as anything in contemporary pop. Number 1. The Beatles. The thing about the Beatles that tends to get lost inside the statistics is the speed of it. From the scrappy Liverpool four-piece who played Hamburg clubs for beer money in 1960 to the band that made Abbey Road in 1969, that is less than a decade. In those 9 years, 4 young men from working-class England effectively compressed what might have taken an entire century of musical development into a single career. That compression is what nobody else has come close to matching. They began playing other people's rock and roll, Chuck Berry riffs, Little Richard energy, Buddy Holly songs, and within 3 years, they were writing their own catalog of hits so prolific that even their throwaway tracks became somebody else's signature cover. By 1965's Rubber Soul, they were changing what a pop album could be. More cohesive, more emotionally serious, more willing to sit still and say something. By 1966's Revolver, they were treating the studio as an instrument in itself, layering sounds and textures that had no precedent in popular music. By Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967, they had put the entire concept of the rock album on a different axis. Not a collection of songs, but a sustained artistic statement. And then, they kept going. The White Album in 1968, sprawling and contradictory and brilliant. Abbey Road in 1969, meticulous and valedictory and perfect. What makes this even more remarkable is that it happened while the 4 of them were personally unraveling. The band that made Abbey Road could barely stand to be in the same room. George Harrison's songwriting had grown into something extraordinary, and the space the band gave him was shrinking. Lennon and McCartney were pulling in opposite directions. And yet, what they recorded in those final sessions is one of the most cohesive and carefully constructed albums in rock. The discipline of making music together outlasted almost everything else. When they stopped in 1970, the silence they left was genuinely disorienting, and it has never quite been filled. Whether you lived through every single one of these bands or are just discovering them for the first time, one thing is true. The music they made in those 10 years has never really gone away. If you enjoyed this look back, please give it a like and subscribe for more journeys through the music that mattered most. There is a lot more where this came from.